Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Lovecraft Country. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a muscular man, Atticus, meeting up with his girlfriend and uncle to embark on a road trip in search of his missing father. They were just driving through a town when they were suddenly chased down by police officers who seemed intent on taking their lives. Faced with such unfair treatment, Atticus could no longer tolerate it. He pulled out his revolver and prepared to confront the police head-on. Fortunately, they managed a perfect drift around a bend, successfully shaking off the police. Still shaken, the three of them got out of the car to catch their breath. Little did they know, in this god-forsaken place, they would encounter more police. An officer informed them that this was Sundown Town, a place that did not welcome people of color. He warned them that if they were seen again before sunset, they would be executed on the spot. With only 10 minutes left until sunset, they hurried to leave. But the officer, with a sinister smile, advised them that speeding would also get them pulled over. It was clear he was deliberately making things difficult. Atticus and his group had no choice but to endure, jumping back into the car to make their escape. The police car followed closely, showing no intention of letting them go. They had to ensure they didn't speed while also making it out of the sundown town within 10 minutes. As the sun was about to set, Atticus's girlfriend, Letitia, pulled out a Desert Eagle. If worst came to worst, they would take down the troublesome officer. Time ticked away, now only 30 seconds left. The tension was palpable. 20 crucial seconds passed, and it seemed they might not make it. Just then, Atticus heard a train whistle. In the last 5 seconds, they saw the sign for the neighboring town and dashed across the railway tracks. According to the rules, police couldn't pursue them across town lines, so they were temporarily safe. But why only temporarily? Because at the upcoming intersection, a large number of police were already waiting for them. They were stunned. This was a setup orchestrated by the earlier officer who had enjoyed toying with them. Having had his fun, he was now ready to kill them under a fabricated charge. Just then, a beastly roar came from the woods, causing the officers to panic. While they might be adept at harassing innocent passers-by, they had no experience dealing with wild animals. A monster leaped out, and the officers fired wildly in fear. Atticus and Letitia used the chaos to escape. The monster was fast, impaling one officer. Luckily, Atticus and Letitia found a cabin and locked themselves inside. The pursuing officers began to batter down the door. Atticus and Letitia, desperate to keep them out, forgot the officers were armed. An officer blasted the door open and stormed in, ordering the pair to barricade the door with a dresser. With a monster on the loose, the officers needed all the help they could get and didn't shoot Atticus and Letitia. After some time, Atticus realized his uncle hadn't made it and wanted to go back to find him. An officer pointed a gun at him, calling his idea foolish and likely to attract the monster. Atticus had no choice but to give up, at least for now. Meanwhile, the uncle was lying flat on the ground, not daring to move, afraid he might become the monster's midnight snack. Once everything around him went quiet, he grabbed a flashlight and cautiously walked through the woods, unaware that a monster above had already set its sights on him. The flashlight beam swept over him and his cute little eyes closed halfway. It wasn't until the people in the cabin spotted him that Atticus quickly opened the door to help. The three finally reunited. But at that moment, a monster's roar echoed from the rooftop. The uncle deduced that the reason the monster hadn't attacked him was because of the small flashlight in his hand. Their deadly weakness was a fear of light. As long as they could hold out until sunrise, they'd be safe. However, they needed more light sources to make it through the night. Letitia suddenly remembered there were flares in the car. According to the police, the car was about 5 kilometers behind the cabin. Letitia decided to go herself, boasting that her childhood experience of outrunning a cheetah meant she could definitely manage the speed. As she reached the car, the monster had already caught up with her. Letitia quickly jumped in and started the engine. The sudden burst of headlights scared the monster so much it burrowed into the ground. Before she could catch her breath, another monster leaped onto the roof. Panicked, Letitia grabbed a flare and flashed it at the monster, then shifted into 5th gear and stomped on the gas, knocking the monster off and speeding back to the cabin. Meanwhile, things weren't exactly peaceful for those in the cabin. The bitten officer was mutating on the spot. Atticus grabbed a gun and fired a shot, intending to fire a second but realizing he was out of bullets. At that moment, a blue light shone into the cabin. Letitia had arrived, crashing into the monster and saving them just in time. The mutated monster couldn't stand the light and jumped out the window to escape. The commotion attracted all the monsters in the woods. The three of them lit all the flares they had, but it still wasn't enough to scare away the monsters. Worse, the monster leader had already set its sights on them. Just when things seemed hopeless, a clear whistle sounded. The monsters, hearing the whistle, scattered immediately. Under the protagonist's halo, the three narrowly escaped with their shitty lives. As the sun rose in the east, they set off, hurriedly making their way. Halfway through, they discovered that the once dark forest had somehow grown a villa. Inside, an even more terrifying and powerful monster awaited them. The scene shifts to a cute and blonde woman who was actually a midwife for bulls. She skillfully reached inside, finally finding the fetus and pulling it out with great force. In less than 24 hours, the calf was successfully born. But there is no way that a bull would give birth to a calf. The creature before them was clearly one of the forest monster's offspring. Seeing the woman's delighted face, it was obvious these monsters came from this castle. Although Atticus and his group had escaped from the monsters to get here, everything in the castle was eerie. And after just one night, his uncle and girlfriend seemed to have forgotten the events of the previous night. No matter what Atticus said, they looked at him with puzzled expressions. Even more frightening, the car that had been battered and bruised the day before now looked brand new, parked in the barn. The butler's explanation was that it had been found in that condition. Seeing Atticus's series of strange behaviors, the other two thought he had lost his mind. Faced with his uncle's doubts, Atticus was furious, almost ready to punch him in his smelly mustache. At that moment, he heard that eerie whistle again, the same sound that had summoned the monsters last time. Atticus followed the sound and saw a sexy woman walking a dog, whistling. The sight of a stranger made the two huge dogs take a defensive stance. Letitia pulled Atticus back, and the uncle took the initiative to talk to the sexy woman, noticing the brick house that looked like a prison. The stone foundation implied a sturdy basement, and any cries for help would be drowned out by the dogs barking. This place was truly terrifying, defying all logic. After some discussion, the three decided to flee during the night, but just then the uncle seemed to hear something. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the ground, as if something was attacking them. Before they could react, another monster appeared behind them. Surrounded by two monsters, they were in a dire situation when that eerie whistle sounded again. It was the midwife from earlier, whose name is Christina. It turns out she knew magic and could control the monsters with her whistle. Knowing they couldn't escape, the three reluctantly followed Christina back to the castle. The castle's owner was a scholarly old man who claimed to be the cult leader of the ancient Dawn, which was dedicated to opening the door to the Garden of Eden. He knew Atticus had a special bloodline that could open a portal to another dimension, granting eternal life. The cult leader assured them they wouldn't be harmed and would be released after the ceremony. However, he secretly watched them with a magic mirror, fearing they might escape again. It seems that the ceremony wouldn't be that simple. The castle's owner hosted a banquet, inviting all the cult members. The room was filled with people giving Atticus and his friends weird looks. The uncle, not one to tolerate such behavior, stood up and delivered a scathing tirade without a single curse word, insulting everyone present. The cult leader couldn't do anything to them, needing their bloodline for the immortality ritual. But Atticus and his group wouldn't sit idly by. Under the cover of night, they sneaked into the dungeon, planning their escape. Unfortunately, they were discovered by the dog's owner, who intended to kill them and feed them to the dogs. At that moment, Letitia hit the owner on the head with a shovel. The uncle noticed a loose stone in the wall, and Atticus helped remove it, preparing to escape through the hole. On the other side, a pair of handcuffed hands emerged from the ground. It was a terrified man. When he finally surfaced, he met Atticus and his group. It turned out he was Atticus's missing father, who had been imprisoned there for years. The cult would stop at nothing to make Atticus cooperate with the ritual. With no time for a proper reunion, the four hurriedly drove away, only to find that Christina had already set up a barrier, making escape impossible. The cult leader arrived, not wasting any words, and shot Letitia. He said in honor of Atticus's bloodline, he would let him choose who to save. Atticus gave his uncle a knowing look, which the cult leader immediately understood, and fired another shot. However, the two shot victims are not dead, and the castle's owner promises that if they cooperate, he will bring in the best veterinarians in the country to treat them. Before the ceremony starts, Christina puts a pure silver ring on Atticus's finger and locks him in a small room. As the cult leader begins chanting, the ceremony officially starts, and the portal to another dimension slowly opens. Inside stands a pregnant woman, but just then, the ring emits a dark power, slowly consuming Atticus. Perhaps it was too itchy, for Atticus let out an angry goose roar, disrupting the ceremony. Everyone was stunned. The castle, losing its magical support, began to collapse rapidly. Atticus barely made it out before the castle was reduced to rubble. Letitia, who had lost her memory, remembered everything, but Atticus's uncle wasn't so lucky and died from excessive bleeding. The survivors, filled with sorrow, each returned to their homes and began their new lives after the incident. Letitia was the luckiest one among them. She inherited a large sum from her stepmother and bought a luxurious villa. But unexpectedly, the house was haunted, and something kept pulling her blanket off every moment. On her first day in the new house, 3 guys showed up uninvited. They weren't there to welcome her, but to protest loudly, tying bricks to a speaker. Even the passing police officers turned a blind eye. The annoying sound blared non-stop, making even opening a window for fresh air a luxury. Letitia wasn't one to back down. At this critical moment, she called all her friends and family and threw a massive party in front of her neighbors. Unexpectedly, the neighbors retaliated by setting a cross on fire in front of her house. This provocative act filled Letitia with rage. She grabbed a baseball bat and went outside with a few men holding shotguns to cover her. She smashed car windows and removed the bricks, undeterred even when someone called the police. They knelt, waiting to be arrested, but their spirit was unbroken. The sheriff who took Letitia away didn't mistreat her. Instead, he was concerned about her new house, asking if anything strange had happened. He mentioned that 6 people had died in the house before she moved in. Hearing this, Letitia suddenly remembered something. Earlier that afternoon, she had been terrified by strange banging noises in the basement. She had called Atticus to check, but they found nothing unusual in the tiny room. The horrors didn't stop there. A mysterious force pulled her blanket while she slept, and a ghostly figure appeared in the mirror while she was showering. These events made it clear that the villa was haunted. After being detained for several days, Letitia was finally released, bruised and battered. She then noticed something strange in the photos, white stripes that became more visible under green light. She quickly gathered all the photos and pieced them together on the floor, forming a pair of eyes. A handsome, doll-faced figure in the photo mouthed, "Get out of this house." Letitia called Atticus to investigate further. They discovered the reason for the villa's low price. The previous owner was a scientist who had been fired for unethical experiments. He likely conducted human experiments in the house, with all the victims being residents of the town. These restless spirits were now trapped in the house. Letitia wanted to help them, so they hired a famous local exorcist for $1. The exorcist immediately sensed something wrong and had them hold hands in a circle for the exorcism, aiming to free the tormented souls. At this crucial moment, 3 men broke into the villa intending to teach Letitia a lesson. Instead, they encountered an unforgettable sight, a ghost with a baby's face and a giant's body approaching them. With no escape, they were scalded to death by the radiator. On the other side, the exorcism trio wasn't having an easy time either. The water washed away the seals on their heads, and a powerful ghost instantly gained the upper hand, possessing the exorcist master and lifting Atticus with a single finger. In a critical moment, Letitia called out the victims' names one by one, pleading for hormone mercy. The master collapsed to the ground, but it didn't end there. The ghost didn't leave. Instead, it possessed Atticus. He kept muttering, "Get out of this house!" Clearly, the entity in Atticus wasn't the victims, but the scientist. As he approached menacingly, Letitia called out to the ghost victims, hoping they would help. After all, they were of the same race. Soon the ghosts appeared, forming a circle and chanting some bullshitting words. After tirelessly chanting for hours, the deranged scientist, unable to out-argue them, sent himself to hell to please Satan. The ghost victims finally found peace in this house. The next day, Atticus went to the real estate agency and was shocked to find that the boss was Christina. She had survived the previous villa collapse. An excited Atticus pulled out his gun to finish her off, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pull the trigger. Clearly, Christina wasn't an ordinary person. She claimed she could revive Atticus's uncle if they found a stolen page from a book that could open the gate to immortality. Atticus, feeling guilty over his uncle's death, found her proposal very appealing. The scene shifts to a dried corpse beginning to move, rapidly transforming back into a normal human form. Surprisingly, it appeared to be a woman on the outside, but had male features below, with strange symbols drawn on the body. Atticus, fearing bad luck, quickly handed her a sheet to cover her sexy body, but his father shone a flashlight in order to get a better look. Through broken language communication, they learned her name was Yahima, both a woman and a man, possessing 2 souls. Many years ago, she was brought here by explorers for human experiments. Discovering their sinister intentions, Yahima refused to cooperate. In retaliation, the explorers executed all her tribesmen in front of her and then used her for their experiments. Unexpectedly, she became immortal and had been sleeping, waiting for someone to wake her. Since learning about the secret of immortality from Christina, Atticus had been itching with curiosity. He, Letitia, and his father searched for the missing book page overnight. Atticus asked Yahima for help, but she refused, calling him a chicken man. This angered his father, who took it as an indirect insult. He snatched the page, but the windows shattered and seawater rushed in. Despite everything, Atticus pulled Yahima to escape together. Water flooded the entire base, and they swam back through an old elevator that still worked underwater. They soon resurfaced, but Yahima let out a piercing scream, causing the cameras to shake. Atticus slapped her into silence. Back at the hotel, they discovered Yahima was cursed. She would become mute if she left the base. With no other choice, Atticus went to find some fun with Letitia, while his father, with a creepy grin, went to Yahima's room. Pretending to be calm, he stood behind her, placed his large hands on her shoulders, and slowly leaned in, not harassing her but ending her life with a single knife stab. The scene shifts to a blonde guy taking a liking to a girl, and that very night, they performed a hormone yoga session. To everyone's astonishment, the beautiful girl woke up to find her skin color had changed. She had turned completely white. Unable to cope with the shock, she ran out onto the street naked. Seeing her reflection in the mirror, she was filled with confusion and disbelief. Timidly, a shopkeeper came out to inquire about her well-being. As the bystanders looked on curiously, the girl was about to leave when she bumped into a child. Coincidentally, a passing police officer saw the commotion. Both the girl and the child stepped back and raised their hands. As always, the police suspected the poor child of wrongdoing, and without investigating further, the officer threw the child onto the car hood, while another officer comforted the girl. Watching the child about to be beaten, the girl intervened in time, explaining that the child was only trying to help her because she was lost. The bystanders, though angry, dared not speak out. Mistaking her for a lost lady of high status, the police escorted her back to the white neighborhood. But then, the girl's body started to change again, her eyes filling with yellowish blood vessels. Across the street, the blonde guy was already waiting outside. It turned out he had made a false police report to bring her back home. He picked her up and threw her on the floor, then turned on a live broadcast of a men's soccer match to not miss the game. While watching, he manually peeled off her skin. By the end of the match, the girl had returned to her original skin color. The guy told her that if she wanted to be somebody important, she had to obey. He placed a bottle of yellow potion that could change her appearance on the table and left the villa. The scene shifted, and the girl appeared radiant in a KFC in the white neighborhood. She had had enough of the unfair treatment of black people by whites, and now enjoyed the privilege of being treated better. Even finding a job became much easier. The company that had ignored her thousands of applications now promptly invited her to start the next day because of her new skin color. However, this feeling didn't last long. Watching her peers being bossed around, her conscience got the better of her. She crushed the bottle of potion in her hand. What happened next was beyond anyone's imagination. Back at home, the blonde guy suddenly fell to his knees, frantically stripping off his clothes, as if something was about to burst out of his body. It turned out the person who had been doing hormone yoga with the girl was actually Christina, and the girl, Ruby, was Letitia's half-sister from different parents. It seemed that Christina had spent a lot to monopolize that page from the magic book that could open the gate to immortality. Christina was taken to the police station for questioning. She wasn't the only one seeking the page to attain immortality. There was also a group of cultist police officers. They threatened Christina to back off, but she refused, leading to the events of the previous episode. To gain Ruby's trust and help her with a major task, she needed to steal a square ball from Letitia's house, known as the astrolabe, which could serve as a navigator to the time-space portal. Unexpectedly, Atticus's aunt had already taken it home and accidentally unlocked the key hidden within it to open the time-space portal. Meanwhile, Atticus and Letitia found clues through the book page. As they prepared to set off with their father, they discovered a shocking secret that Atticus's father, with his 8-pack abs, was actually gay. Atticus was stunned, questioning his own existence and recalling the frequent spankings from childhood with horror. On the other side, his aunt was ready to depart. Unaware that she had the key, Atticus just wanted to borrow her car, but was directly refused. With no other option, Atticus took the train to St. Louis. Just as he settled in, he received a call from Letitia. She had found the missing astrolabe in his aunt's house, already open with coordinates engraved on the top. Given the aunt's previous behavior, she was undoubtedly headed to the coordinates location. As expected, the aunt drove like a maniac and finally arrived at the destination. Inside, there was an object resembling an Italian cannon. When she reached the control panel, she immediately spotted the keyhole. Without hesitation, she jammed the key in and gently turned the switch. The machine seemed to start up, but then again it didn't. She pressed every switch, but nothing happened. Frustrated, she slapped the machine twice, and suddenly it roared to life. The aunt quickly grabbed a pen and paper to record all the operational details. Just then, voices came from outside, and she hid behind the machine. 2 police officers entered and quickly noticed the aunt. They had indecent intentions towards her. Just as they were about to act on their impulses, a loud noise came from outside. One officer went to check and saw a dark shadow darting in, knocking over the other officer. It was Atticus, not a superhero, who seized the opportunity to snatch a gun. While he was fighting the 2 officers, the aunt quietly picked up a gun. No one noticed that the machine had activated and a time tunnel appeared on the wall. Atticus threw one officer into the tunnel and shot the other who was trying to help. Killing officers was a grave crime. Atticus took the gun from his aunt and tried to comfort her. At that moment, the time portal's powerful suction pulled the aunt in. The scene shifted to a glowing orb crashing into an unknown planet, transforming into a spaceship upon landing. The aunt, wearing a bizarre spacesuit, was accompanied by Atticus's deceased uncle. They roamed freely in this surreal realm, living carefree lives. Meanwhile, after countless time travels, Atticus returned to the same world, just as the time portal closed. He tried to reactivate it, but his frantic pressing made the machine shut down completely. Holding his aunt's notes, he realized he couldn't stay. He quickly pulled out the key and fled. The crime scene was not cleaned up, leaving behind the book page. The police soon traced it to the book's owner, Diana, the aunt's daughter. The police drew 2 crosses at her feet, and the sheriff began chanting. Countless worms emerged from the ground, spitting ancient slime onto Diana's forehead. She felt suffocated and collapsed, weak. The next day, Diana finally understood the curse had summoned 2 little demons. She tried to tell Letitia about her ordeal, but Letitia was rushing off to a date. The little demon stood behind her, so Diana rode her bicycle away as quickly as she could. As the sun set, she arrived at the police station but didn't go in, seemingly waiting for something. A police car drove off, and Diana followed it, with the demon trailing behind. She followed the car to the house of the cultist police officer who cursed her. Diana demanded to know what they wanted from her, insisting she was just an innocent girl with nothing of value. The sheriff leered at her and said she was overthinking it. To remove the curse and get rid of the demons, she had to steal the astrolabe for them. Diana hesitated for a moment, spat in the sheriff's face, and then walked away with defiant grace. Once again, the 2 little demons blocked Diana's path. This time, she didn't choose to run. Instead, she let out an angry roar and charged straight at them. Back home, she grabbed a weapon and prepared for a fight. It must be said, the demon's entrance was somewhat comical, but Diana didn't hold back. She fired a shot right away. Seeing its companion getting beaten, the other demon rushed in to help. Hearing the noise, Atticus's father thought Diana had brought a boyfriend home. He burst through the door, only to find Diana swinging an iron rod at thin air. He assumed she had a sudden mental breakdown and rushed to stop her, holding her tightly. Suddenly, a wound appeared on Diana's arm. Only those cursed could see the little demons. The scratch on her arm quickly dried up and turned black, and she fainted. With no other option, the family called in Christina, who knew magic. She used the blood of a close relative, dripping it onto Diana's forehead. The demons inside her began to convulse, and small worms crawled out from her dried arm, quickly transforming into flies that filled the room. At that moment, Diana's arm returned to normal. Though her life was saved, a second ritual was needed to fully awaken her. Unbeknownst to them, that very night, the cultist policeman planned to violently steal the astrolabe from Letitia's house. What's worse, Atticus was still outside and had been spotted by the police. In an instant, all guns were aimed at him. Atticus raised his hands in surrender, but the police fired anyway. Just before the bullets hit him, a giant monster burst out. With a fierce charge, it quickly dealt with all the police, including the magic-using sheriff. The monster then roared at Atticus and Diana before lowering its head to enjoy Atticus's petting. From this moment, it became Atticus's guardian beast. This all began a day earlier. To protect his family, Atticus decided to learn some magic. He found Christina and traded the key to the time portal for her guardian beast. Meanwhile, Letitia, out of love for Atticus, wanted to trade a half-page she had found for invulnerability. But an ordinary person couldn't have two magical abilities at once. Tearfully, Letitia cast the invulnerability spell on herself, losing both abilities. The cultist police took advantage of this, planning to eliminate their biggest rival that night. Two men beat Christina, wrapped her neck in wire, tied a wheel hub to her, and threw her into a nearby lake. They thought they had drowned such a beautiful lady without hormone mercy. Cry if you want, but I won't shed a tear, because she didn't die. Using magic, Christina had extended her life. When she heard the sheriff was injured, she put on a yellow-haired disguise to finish him off. The sheriff begged for mercy, admitting to killing Christina. But the blonde guy revealed he was Christina all along, orchestrating everything to eliminate her rival. With the sheriff dead, no one could lift Diana's curse since the only solution, the magic book, had burned 100 years ago. Luckily, they knew the location of the time portal, and Atticus's aunt had found the key in another dimension. They hurried to the portal and successfully opened it. Inside were 60 trillion timelines. To return to Tulsa in 1921, the machine needed a medium to issue commands. This medium could only be the aunt, who had traveled through time and returned. Grabbing million-volt cables with both hands, the aunt used an old photo for positioning and instantly opened the passage. The three of them jumped in, but unexpectedly they landed in the midst of a racial conflict, with bullets flying everywhere. Terrified, Atticus quickly jumped back. His father stood by the window staring outside, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Atticus's aunt reached her limit, spitting with every word. The camera cut to Letitia, who was just saved by Atticus's grandmother. After learning what had happened, the grandmother willingly handed over the magic book to Letitia. Before Letitia could bow in gratitude, a Molotov cocktail flew in, setting the entire room ablaze. Just when it seemed all was lost, the grandmother transferred her protective magic to Letitia, allowing herself to be consumed by the flames. With the magic's protection, Letitia walked down the street with the magic book and managed to return to the present just in time. By now, Atticus's aunt's hair had turned blue from the electric shock, looking like a Super Saiyan god, but she had no regrets. Diana finally woke from the curse, though her arm was beyond saving. On the other side, Christina found Ruby, whom she had deceived. Showering her with sweet talk, Ruby was moved and quickly fell for her again. They used the transformation potion once more. As the day of the ritual approached, Atticus decided to use the magic book to stop Christina's immortality. He cast a spell to summon Christina's ancestor, bringing along Atticus's mother and grandmother for good measure. The cult leader, surprisingly adept, used teleportation to appear before the couple, only to say they had found the book before being summoned back. Atticus rushed forward, tackled him, and cut off a piece of his flesh, reluctantly sending everyone back. They returned home to devise a plan. Christina stormed in, promising not to harm any people if Atticus's group didn't interfere. Atticus bluntly refused, leading to a complete fallout. The next day, Letitia approached Ruby, asking her to get Christina's blood. Torn between her girlfriend and her half-sister, Ruby was conflicted, but ultimately chose family, successfully obtaining her aunt's blood. The factions set off for the altar, arriving at a forested mountain. One of them bit into the piece of flesh and took it to the altar's center, only to be surrounded by a group of white people. Meanwhile, Diana, waiting in the car, was attacked by a horde of monsters, but Atticus's guardian beast saved her just in time. As the others prepared for the spell near the altar, everything seemed to be going smoothly until it all fell apart with the two sisters. The Ruby who had come with them was actually Christina in disguise, transformed by a potion. Ruby had already been killed while stealing the blood. Enraged, Letitia threw a left hook, and they agreed no hair-pulling, only fists. But Letitia was no match for the transformed Christina. Christina lifted Letitia and threw her from a high tower. Christina's minions captured the rest of the group. Atticus, stripped and tied to the sacrificial altar, was ready. Christina made a grand entrance and the ritual began. She started draining Atticus's bloodline power. Meanwhile, Letitia, protected by her grandmother's magic, woke up from her fall. By the time she arrived, Atticus was barely alive, and Christina had completed the ritual, achieving immortality. The air felt noticeably fresher. Letitia charged at Christina with a knife, seeking vengeance, but every wound healed instantly. Letitia chanted a spell, determined to make Christina suffer, if not kill her. Suddenly, white smoke rose, shooting up to the moon. The sidekick girl who had accompanied them seemed to realize something, walked to the smoke and touched it. Tentacles extended from her eyes, one wrapping around Christina and the other binding Atticus, absorbing their powers. The combined magic resulted in a massive explosion. The scene shifts. A massive stone slab has crushed Christina, leaving her completely powerless. Atticus, having lost all his diabetic blood, is no longer breathing. The group prepares to take his body back home. On the other side, Christina desperately cries for help. Diana, hearing the explosion, arrives at the scene. Seeing Christina still alive, Diana reveals her mechanical arm and swiftly breaks her neck, which ends this ridiculous drama. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.